That was for Joan.
All right, well, let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Renee Kernberger. I'm the Senior Vice President of Development and Communications here at Pathfinders. We're delighted to have you all with us today. As I mentioned, you are already using the chat function. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A buttons, and we'll make sure to include your comments or your questions in our conversation. So today we are sharing an update on our incredibly important work in supported housing. We have expanded, we're going through a significant expansion of that work this year. Last year, around this time, we announced really exciting news that we were, being awarded a number of government grants and some philanthropic gifts that was going to allow us to double the number of young people housed through our supported housing department in 2021. And we are well on our way to doing that work. And today we're going to explore some of those challenges and successes and bright spots that we've encountered. With me today is our President and CEO, Tim Bach, and our Supported Housing Director, Becky Kanitz. So thank you both for being here and sharing your incredible expertise with everyone. Let's start by discussing just what is the scope of youth homelessness in our community and what is Pathfinder's response to it, Tim?
Thank you, Renee, and just a warm welcome to all of you. We have several board members, we have long-standing donors, we have friends and supporters, and it's just always an honor for us to be able to gather and update you on the critically important work that we do here at Pathfinders. It's great to start at the beginning in terms of trying to define and quantify the extent of the problem here in our community. And as has always been the case, that's an easier said than done proposition. There are numerous ways we try to get, as an organization, our arms around how many youth and young adults aged 25 and under are experiencing homelessness and housing instability in our community who are in need of the support and resources that we at Pathfinders provide. We look at a number of different variables or markers to try to quantify that need, and in particular, how much of that need remains unmet. We do point in time surveys, which are really just very cursory snapshots of, in any given moment on any given day, how many people show up to be counted, sort of a rough head count. We know that those are always under counts and underrepresenting the true extent of housing instability and homelessness as it affects our young people here in the greater Milwaukee area. We have a coordinated entry system that looks to standardize the way in which people, including youth, get into, or at least into the line for services, and determine who's most vulnerable and doing a quick screening or interviewing. From that alone, we know there are well over 300 plus young people on a current waiting list, or at least the waiting list before we had to shut down coordinated entry for youth because we weren't keeping pace as a community with the volume of need and the number of young people that were deemed in dire need of housing and housing support, yet we didn't have the resources to provide them that. So it felt really problematic and morally questionable to keep putting young people in crisis on a wait list when we didn't have the community's capacity to meet that need. And that's something that we at Pathfinders are about to embark on, is how do we organizationally lead in efforts to build greater capacity to serve more young people. But we know the need is great, and it has never been greater given the impact of systemic racism and discrimination that I think most of us are now much more aware of, but that historically all of our young people at Pathfinders in our 50 plus years of service have always experienced in terms of disproportionate impact relative to racism and other forms of discrimination. And certainly the pandemic has accelerated and magnified the need of supported housing and other resources for our community's most vulnerable young people. So we're always trying to keep pace with what is the growing need, and we know it is great.
Thank you. So, we've been a little bit of an anomaly in our service sector during the pandemic. When a lot of people were pulling back or suspending, we started to expand. We keep saying, we're on track to more than double the number of people served through our that we're providing housing to, that we're providing those wraparound services to in our supported housing program. Tim, will you walk us through the funding portion and any challenges and successes that we've been seeing over the last year?
Sure. Yeah, it was pretty audacious of us, I think, to announce about a year ago that in 2021, in the midst of a pandemic, that we were securing the resources necessary to more than double our capacity from the prior year, because we knew there were that many youth, young adults, and their families who were needing our support. And we were exceptionally successful last year in securing some additional public support and governmental support relative to growing our capacity to serve youth and young adults who are experiencing trafficking or exploitation, that we were able to add more youth to our lists of young people we were serving relative to youth aging into adulthood and transitioning out of adolescence, as well as youth aging out of home care. And so those are some of the critical areas where we've seen some of the greatest growth opportunities. And what that has meant is we really needed to build our housing team. I mean, Becky is an exceptional director, and you'll hear more from her directly in just a moment. But we didn't have enough housing case managers, and we didn't have enough housing specialists to really build the inventory of apartments that were available in the community, to build the network of landlords that we need to be in good partnership with, and enough staff to do the intensive one-on-one case management and supportive work that our youth and families do need. More recently, we were awarded some additional funding from United Way's Safe and Stable Homes Initiative in order to expand our capacity to serve young families, because we're part of a community-wide effort led by United Way to effectively end family homelessness by 2023. Again, a very audacious goal, but one we believe is very possible if we collectively pull our resources together and have that kind of collective impact. It has been admittedly quite a challenge in terms of trying to have that level of growth within a relatively short period of time within the parameters of an ongoing pandemic, not just in this community, but across the world. We've seen some real challenges in terms of being able to hire the right folks to add to the team. We take a trauma-informed lens to the work that we do, and so we pay particular attention to bringing members of the team into our organization that have relevant life experiences, who relate well to young people, and who understand systemic racism, trauma, its impacts on housing and home and housing stability or instability in the case of our young people. But we have really risen to that challenge, and we are continuing to accelerate that growth and build our team in order to serve more young people. We anticipate, as we had planned, that by the end of this year, we hope to have well over 100 youth, and many of them with their children, within our supported housing. I mean, we'll speak later about some of the challenges we're seeing as a community relative to just the availability of appropriate and safe apartments and housing. But that's something that as a community, we're continuing to sort of struggle to come up with resolution and solutions to trying to address.
So Tim talked a little bit briefly about our United Way Safe and Stable Homes Initiative and their recent $100,000 investment. Around this funding piece, we've seen every level of government, is contributing to the growth in this area. We've seen some CARES Act funding that provides a smaller time frame of stability than we would prefer to give housing to young people. But some of those successes where we've been able to grow is due to private philanthropy. So we have seen a couple of private donors really understand that our government grants, while they do a ton of amazing work for us, they don't cover everything. They don't cover everything that we need in order to support the young people fully in these programs. So that's why, talking about that funding piece has been so important, and having our donors really understanding this work at a deep level is important, because you can see how quickly donations and private philanthropy can make a difference in the work that we're doing and expand our reach. So Becky, to go into numbers a little bit, tell us a little bit more about, the programmatic expansion to date as it relates to staff and young people.
Absolutely. Thanks, Renee. So I went back and looked because it certainly felt like we had a very busy year. So I went back and looked at some of the numbers. And as of September of 2020, we had 32 young people enrolled across our supported housing department. So that includes all of our different programs, 32 youth in total, with 7 total staff members supporting those youth. 1 year later, as of September of 2021, we were serving 62 young people. Now that didn't include their minor children. So I did that, ran those numbers, and that gets us to 106 runaway and/or homeless youth being served currently, with 12 total staff people, and in the process of hiring a 13th. And I really think, as we've heard today, building infrastructure in order to be able to do this work is critical. We're absolutely thrilled that we've been able to almost double the number of young people that we were serving last year. It's so important. The need is so great. But in order to do that well, and in order to do it in a way that is sustainable for staff and for young people, frankly, we need to make sure that we have the infrastructure available for it. So that's been, it's been a key part of that growth. Obviously, just looking at sheer numbers, we've been able to serve more youth, of course. What we've been able to do with a greater number of staff as well, though, is really develop the programming. It sounds like we'll get into it in just a little bit, but we have been able to promote some of our supported housing team members into leadership roles, which is obviously a great opportunity for those staff members, but also really helps to develop the programming, to make sure that we're always at the forefront of best practices, and that our young people are getting the right kind of support at the right time. And without that infrastructure, it's not possible to do that. So obviously significant growth is a wonderful thing, and it's a different kind of work. And we've had to look at policies and procedures, things that were in place previously that worked really well with 30 youth, don't work really well with 60 youth. So it's been really a really wonderful thing to see that change, and it's really challenged us as a team to be thinking forward in how we're changing our policies, procedures, and practices.
Thanks, Becky. We talk a lot about how individual, we have a couple of specific donors on the philanthropic side who provided funding to allow for that expansion, to allow for you to create a couple of positions that government funding doesn't support because they aren't deemed as providing direct service. Share a little bit about the supported housing manager position and the housing specialist positions, and how they impact both your team and expand that capacity, but also how they serve young people.
Well, as you said, Renee, both of these positions, and I'll talk about our one supported housing manager as well as our 2 housing specialists right now, they don't provide direct service. So they're not doing case management. They're not meeting with youth one-on-one on a weekly basis to do case management support. But there's no question that what they do supports our department and supports our youth directly. So one of our most significant changes this year is at the beginning of 2021, we were able to promote a current or a housing case manager into the supported housing program manager role. And we just saw that as we were growing, as we were developing, we needed to gain leadership on the team. At the time, I'll say that I was doing the grants management side as well as the supervision side and the program development, and things were falling. Things weren't happening in the way that we needed them to with such rapid growth. So Molly Brenner, who had been a case manager with us on our PATHs team, was promoted to a program manager, and she's just done a phenomenal job. At this point, how we've divided tasks is I can focus more on the grants management, the department development, again, looking at best practices and kind of our outward focus of who are we training, and when are we able to say yes to training opportunities that others across the state and frankly across the country have been looking for from us. And then Molly then has the time and attention to focus more inward on our staff and rather indirectly our young people. So making sure that our staff feel confident, capable, comfortable doing the work that they're doing, that they have someone to brainstorm with when challenges sort of exceed that day-to-day challenge that we might encounter. And as I said, that indirectly supports our young people. It makes sure that they're able to get the answers to the questions that they have much more rapidly than if we'd had a smaller leadership team. In addition to that, we've hired 2 housing specialists. And this is a role that I think is so innovative and so creative. There aren't a whole lot of organizations, particularly in the Milwaukee area, but really that I know of even across the country, that are using housing specialists in this way. But the way we operate our supported housing programs is that in addition to providing rent assistance and case management to our youth, we really want to make sure that our young people are getting the support that they need as they seek apartments and as they learn to engage with landlords and learning what that means to be a good neighbor. Some programs will move young people or individuals into apartments and kind of assume, or they're working with a different population, that individual knows what to do. They know what to do when there's a maintenance request that needs to be submitted, or they know what to do if there's a safety issue and that tenant has a question. And that's not the population that we're working with. A lot of our youth have never lived independently. Many have bounced around for years of their lives. So we coach them through all of that. Our housing specialists have been invaluable members of the team. Their main role is to really be the point person for our landlords and property managers. So that includes a lot of different tasks. First and foremost, they're helping to make sure that our property managers feel supported, particularly those who are more longstanding partners, making sure that checks are received on time, and that if there are concerns about a tenant's behavior or a lease question, that they're getting those answers, the answers to their questions quickly and in a timely manner. Our housing specialists also help to grow our inventory and our landlord base. So they're also constantly seeking new partners and attending events and sending emails and making phone calls and reaching out to people who may be new to the property management side of things or who are looking to partner with new organizations. They assist with helping to make sure that all of our units meet habitability standards. So they go into an apartment, help set up showings for our young people, meet with our youth to find out what type of apartment they're looking for, asking questions like, do you prefer a first floor or do you not want to be on the first floor? Which major bus lines would it be important for you to live near? A balcony versus no balcony. For some young people with children, they say, absolutely not, that's not good. It wouldn't be safe for my family. Others say that helps me be really safe and feel like I can get outside when I need some fresh air and I'm not feeling well. So things like that. But our housing specialists really take the lead in finding those units. It takes such a long time to do that kind of research and to look at what's available. And then, setting up those showings and making sure that the apartments are in really good condition and the best condition that they can possibly be in when our youth move in. At this point, we have about 40 landlord partners. which is a pretty significant group of individuals, each with different properties in different parts of Milwaukee County. We have some property managers that are housing 20 plus young people in their various buildings, and others that have 1 or 2 units with us, but each of them gets the time and attention that they need. And our housing specialists have really offered us the opportunity to be able to work really effectively and productively with our landlord partners, but also to educate them and to send the message to them that they're a really critical piece of this puzzle, and to help them feel like partners in ending youth homelessness rather than just having a very transactional relationship.
You've really painted a clear picture on how important that role is in the organization, and how it's such a misnomer to think that it isn't directly serving young people. When you get into all the implications of finding a location and walking young people through that experience, and at the same time, how overwhelming that must have been when you think about being a case manager and trying to solve much more critical and immediate needs of a young person while also trying to manage a relationship with this many landlords. I can't, those two just, you can really see the experience that must have been like, and how we can't, as a community, or certainly not an organization like Pathfinders, the way that we believe in housing young people and providing those wraparound services, how those two things we could not house more young people without building out this infrastructure. So thank you for really painting that picture. I'm gonna ask us to take a step back and up for a minute and talk a little bit about coordinated entry. So one thing we didn't really cover from the start, every once in a while we think we do this work every day and we forget to answer some of these questions. So our apologies for that. But let's talk a little bit about, we talked about what homelessness looks like in Milwaukee and what that, how expansive it is. Let's talk a little bit about what coordinated entry is, and how a young person then ends up getting a slot in our housing department. How do those two things work?
Well, let me start off by saying they don't always work particularly well, although they are intended to level the playing field, so to speak, as to who has access and priority for what is admittedly an insufficient amount of resources in our community. Pathfinders as an organization, we were deeply involved in the development of this community's coordinated entry system when it was initially rolled out. And it is admittedly a flawed system, because it, in effect, what it's trying to do is figure out, of all the people in need, who are the most vulnerable and who is the most likely to suffer serious consequences, and in some cases die, if they are left on the streets or in places not meant for human habitation. And so it's a prioritization, and in order to be prioritized, you need to know how to access coordinated entry. And in this community, it's by reaching out to 211, who runs the coordinated entry system. And then you have to go through a vulnerability indexing and a whole set of, really personal and sometimes kind of invasive questions, so that people get a sense of what's your score, and do you score high enough to get higher up on the list of folks waiting for an opening, whether that's in emergency shelter or winter overflow or rapid rehousing or permanent, all the different types of ways we try to address and attend to people's homelessness. But what isn't necessarily well understood is that if you're not literally homeless, if HUD, which is sort of one of the primary funders of housing resources in this, as well as communities across the country, if you don't meet HUD's pretty strict definition of, are you in fact truly homeless, you don't get on the list. And so we don't do a particularly good job as a community of addressing those who are precariously housed, those who are housed but highly vulnerable and perhaps being exploited or trafficked in order to be housed, or doubled or tripled up in unsafe conditions, or all the myriad of ways, especially young people find to try to get off the streets. A lot of those situations never even qualify for a young person to get on a waiting list for coordinated entries resources. It's a real challenge with the variety of funding sources that we try to weave together in ways that extend our ability to serve young people. We are adamant that when we can prevent homelessness, we have an obligation to do that. We are a housing first organization. And so we really believe that housing is a right that all people should be able to avail of themselves. And it is immoral to leave people in vulnerable situations or on the streets or having to be taken advantage of in order to get their basic needs met. But the reality is not all funders agree with those same sort of principles. And every funder will have its own eligibility in terms of here's who you can serve, here's who you can't serve. So we get really creative in trying to use both the coordinated entry system and our mix of funding to weave together a really strong safety net for our young people. But it programmatically is such a challenge because Becky and her team need to know, okay, HUD says this is who's eligible and who we can serve here. Here's CARES Act funding, and that's temporary, but here's who that serves. We were fortunate just to have learned that we were one of just a handful of organizations that as of October 1st got a renewal of our transitional living program grant at the federal level, and that's through the Runaway and Homeless Youth Services in DC. And they have a very specific criteria by age and by situation of who isn't or isn't eligible. And so, we bring all of those funding resources together and then try to engage with the coordinated entry system to get as many young people prioritized and into our services as possible. The fact is, because we're also serving young adults, what our experience has been, they don't generally fare well in adult-focused service systems, and they don't tend to get very high up in the community's prioritization of need. And so that's an ongoing challenge for us. And I think, Becky has spoken to that as well in terms of, some of the challenges we face.
So there, basically, to answer this question of what is the criteria, what criteria do we look at? It's not cut and dry. It really depends on funding source. We have 5 to 7 different sources of funding for this, and it's extremely complicated, and there's not enough. Yep. Does that about cover?
Yeah, that's a great way to summarize it. And you mentioned earlier, Renee, which I think is so important. Every funder has its own criteria. For example, our PAS program, which is one of now only 2 in the state, that is funded by the state of Wisconsin's Department of Children and Families. It's really innovative. It's really comprehensive. It's an evidence-based best practice standard that others across the country come to our program to learn how to do this. Its focus is on youth who have aged out of foster care and are at high vulnerability for becoming homeless within the first year or 2 of leaving out-of-home care systems. So that's got very specific criteria as well. But it's a good example of where if we can get, the state funding and then pair it with federal dollars and have a sort of parallel process for that, and then have local funding, what brings that all together in a much more seamless manner is philanthropic support. It's that flexible funding that is locally driven for the most part, and not always, but often that's the case. And it helps us fill in where other funders say, nope, you can't serve that young person because they don't fit, or yeah, you can fund a case manager, but you can't fund a housing specialist, or we move young people as often as we need to, because one of our primary goals is let's make sure they don't become homeless or become homeless again. And we want to make sure they don't get evicted. And so if a place where we try them initially doesn't seem to work, either because the landlord isn't finding it working or the young person doesn't feel comfortable or safe, we're going to move them. And we may do that several times to find the right fit. A lot of our governmental funding, especially at the federal level, says, yeah, you can't use our funding to move people. Similarly, we don't want to just get people into an apartment. We want to have it feel like a home, and we want it to be furnished and safe for them and often for their children. A lot of our federal funding, again, will say, yeah, but you can't buy furnishings. You can't use our funding for that. We're not going to put a young person, whether they have children or not, into an empty apartment and have them sleeping on the floor. That's just not how we do this. And so that philanthropic support not just fills in, but it makes whole the work that we're doing.
I think that's a great example of how some of our challenges and key learnings are also bright spots and successes, right? That beautiful marriage between all of our work and how it comes together in service to our young people. Becky, why don't you talk about some of the other challenges that we faced in this work this year?
Well, you know, we talk a lot on our team about how this is hard work. It's emotional work. It's before we had moving support, it was physically challenging. And it is difficult work that a very loving and caring team signs up to do. But doing it during a pandemic, doing it during a time of many examples of injustice and crisis and desperation in our community has made it more challenging. And so, you know, we've talked a lot as a team about how do we support our young people? How do we help them to feel safe in their community? You know, we've had a number of young people who've said, when we've asked them, where in Milwaukee would you feel safe? You know, looking for different apartments. And they've told us, well, nowhere. Right now, I don't feel safe. And that's a very hard message to hear from our youth. So, you know, doing what we can to support our young people amidst a number of crises right now, a number of different epidemics that we're seeing that our youth are facing. Supporting our team through that as well. I mean, in order for our young people to make healthy decisions and to feel cared about and to feel supported and have what they need, we've really focused on health and wellness of our team. And making sure that our staff feels safe doing this work and that they feel comfortable and that they have the resources that they need in order to be strong supporters of our youth. You know, I think one of the other major things we've seen is the rental climate has dramatically changed in the last year. Our young people are competing. I mentioned this in a meeting earlier today. We had a landlord tell us that recently for one of their apartment units, you know, it was about a $650 one-bedroom unit, central city of Milwaukee. They had 60 applicants for this one unit. And to think what our young people are up against, many of our young people don't come with rental histories. They don't come with credit histories. Some of them struggle to pass the background checks, you know, due to challenges that they've experienced for years. You know, they're up against a lot, and that rental climate has become very competitive in the last year. You know, again, that's a significant challenge, but our team, in particular, our housing specialists, have really helped to offset that challenge and to continue to look for units and to make sure that we're competitive in that market. That you know, that the landlords see the benefit and see that they are truly partners with us, and that we are strong partners, you know, back with them, that we will honor our word when we say that, you know, when there are challenges that arise, we will be there to walk through them with our landlords. We do that. We make sure that we're diligent when it comes to cutting rent checks and making sure that they are on time and in full, particularly after the year that a lot of our landlord partners have had, where their incomes were cut as well. You know, certainly some additional challenges in this last year that we couldn't have anticipated, but the team is so incredibly strong, and our young people are so resilient. We've made it through them. And, you know, are just thrilled at how many young people we're serving right now and how many are preparing to successfully graduate from the program.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, you know, a lot of the things that we're facing are things that everyone in America is facing right now relative to hiring challenges you mentioned earlier, Tim. You know, we need staff to be able to support young people. And then Becky, what you're talking about relative to the market and the rental, you know, the rental market being a little high. It's also, there are very, very few slots are available. Is there anything else from an overall organizational challenge that you feel like we've seen through this expansion, Tim, that you want to talk through?
Yeah, we at Pathfinders, we talk a lot about the disproportionate nature of homelessness as it relates to our young people. And what we mean by that is year after year, we see a disproportionate number of young people coming to Pathfinders who are youth of color. We see a disproportionate number of young people who identify as LGBTQ+. And we see far and away a disproportionate, almost exclusively, a group of young people who are coming from high levels of poverty and disengagement from the community. And we live in a community that has a long history of systemic inequality, especially when it comes to housing opportunities. I mean, we talk a lot at Pathfinders about Milwaukee's need for more housing that is more affordable for more people. And absent that, we experience what Becky is describing: one unit. The rent may not seem to be too high, but there are 60 some applicants for that one bedroom unit. I think that speaks volumes about the lack of sufficient housing that is available for people that they find to be affordable. I mean, the standard has always been, if more than 30% of your resources are going toward your housing costs, you have a high vulnerability and a high level of housing instability. And you add the layers of systemic inequalities that come with being Black or brown, of being LGBTQ+. I mean, all of those variables add up to a disproportionate impact that our young people experience. You know, and then you add the layers of challenge and frankly loss that have come because of COVID. And then you see the escalating levels of violence within not just our community, but for us within our community. And that presents challenges not just for our youth and young adults and their families, but also our staff and their ability to continue to safely engage with our young people within the communities in which we're trying to help them achieve housing stability and success. It's just layer upon layer upon layer of challenge that, frankly, I'm just so humbled by how this organization and our team have been able to really effectively try to address that day in and day out.
Yeah, when I think about bright spots and successes, I think about early in the pandemic and Becky's team, you know, our supported housing team, when young people were feeling incredibly isolated and we didn't know what was safe and healthy to do with each other, relative to being in the same room or being, you know, near each other. And our staff would go and drive and sit in their cars outside of a young person's apartment and talk to them on the phones that they knew and could feel that they were not alone. That's one of those things for me that I continue to think of bright spots and successes. But I also think about young people who graduate from our program. So Becky, do you want to share a little bit about what those successes look like?
I'm so glad you brought that up, Renee, because, you know, right now it does feel like there's just this additional level of stress to the work. But those graduations and the successes that we see are so powerful and are so impactful for our youth and for our staff. We recently actually graduated a number of youth from our PADS program. Some of our first enrollees in the program kind of graduated together in their own little cohort that they made, which was kind of fun. And we have one youth in particular that really stands out to me because of the impact that Pathfinders has had on her life. And I was reflecting about her situation with a couple other coworkers. She had been in and out of foster homes. Group homes in particular were very challenging for her. And she spent a number of nights at our youth shelter. even as the staff there reflected, they love her so dearly, but they recognize that she struggled in that environment. She had a hard time interacting with peers. She was very frustrated. She was very angry about what she had been through, and didn't at that time know what to do with that anger. But the shelter staff loved her through it. When we were awarded our first PADS grant, she was one of our very first enrollees into the program. We utilized drop-in center support very frequently because she had a high level of need, and she was slow to trust our staff. She didn't believe that she was going to get an apartment that was going to be paid for and that was going to be subsidized. So she'd go to showings and she would frankly kind of drag her feet when it came to the application and moving forward because she just didn't think this was real. And so it took a while to get her going. She found a beautiful apartment. She, shortly after moving in, gave birth to her daughter, who is happy and healthy and loves the home that the family has created together. This mother is now working, and we kind of supported her through what the childcare process looks like. And again, she wasn't sure who she wanted to trust in caring for her child. She did a tremendous amount of research, found someone that she's very happy with, and she recently graduated. And it was amazing to coach her through that process and to look back at how far she'd come. And we talked about the loss that she felt as she transitioned from what felt like a family to her. And as a team talked about, well, what can that look like now? You know, does this relationship need to end? No, absolutely not, but it needs to change because she's ready for this. She still calls. She's been graduated for, for almost 5 months now. She calls about once a month just to make sure that we're still here and to make sure that she can still call and get her questions answered if she has them. But she has so few. She's ready. She's independent. And you know, those kinds of things really, we need those kinds of experiences and those stories to keep us going. And they take time, it takes patience. You know, those transitions for her took 3.5 years from her time in the shelter up until now. But her life has been transformed. And you know, we talk a lot about, particularly with our Safe and Stable Homes project with United Way, not only has this youth's life changed, but her child's life is different because of Pathfinders and because of Mom's participation with us.
And you know, that example is, I think, a powerful testament to our belief that if as a community we are serious about trying to end homelessness, it starts with breaking the cycle of homelessness within the lives of our youth and young adults. We will never end homelessness here in Milwaukee if we don't attend to the opportunities we have to break that cycle with our youth and young adults. And that's just a beautiful example of the power of that and ending that cycle with this young mother. And so that her and her child do not have to continue to feel that cyclical nature of homelessness that plays out generation after generation. It's why our work is so critically important in this community.
I think there's also a little bit of a misunderstanding that the types of supports that we offer are lifetime or needed over an entire lifetime.
No.
Do either of you want to address that? You know, Becky, you gave a pretty intense experience that was over 3.5 years. That's both long and incredibly short in the lifespan of someone.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that's one, you know, that's one of the most important pieces of engaging with young people earlier in their lives. You know, we have this incredible opportunity that so many of our young people have experienced tremendous amounts of trauma and in years of experiencing homelessness, but they're at a stage in their lives where, you know, they see that things can be different. They believe that things can be different. There are opportunities for growth and change, you know, from opportunities to biological changes, I mean, brain development, all of it aligns with the population that we're serving. And so it's so critical, you know, the earlier we can connect with youth, the faster we can stop the this snowball effect of trauma and crisis that they're experiencing. For many of our youth, we engage with them, on average 17 to 21 or 22 years old is kind of our first connection with our supported housing participants. And yeah, 3 years, we're kind of seeing 3 years, 3.5 years is kind of the sweet spot for us. And for some people that may seem like a long period of time, but we're working with young people, many of who've had, 18, 20 years of trauma and crisis and housing instability. So it's not going to happen overnight. But the fact that, thus far, everybody that we've worked with has a transition plan. They have a plan for what things are going to look like when they have gained independence and gained skill. We're seeing that for most of our young people, they are self-selecting to graduate. Now, of course, there's that feeling of loss that we work through, of losing what feels like a family and what feels like connection when they graduate. But it's not that they're not ready. They are well prepared for that next step once they leave. And, as we've talked about, for many of them, they're new parents or they will be parents. So they've ended that cycle of homelessness, not only for themselves, but for their children moving forward. And it's so powerful to think of that.
That is definitely a multiplier. And that obviously we believe that we're that organization that can really be a stopgap in the community. We know we can do work. So thank you for sharing. That was, I think that for us is what success feels like. That's what hope feels like. That's what empowering youth, our mission is to empower youth and change lives. And that's a literal description of that work that we do. So tell everybody a little bit about what you both see on the horizon for 2022 in our supported housing department and for the young people we're serving.
Becky, do you want to go first?
Sure, absolutely can. Well, we've had tremendous growth this past year in 2021, but the need is still great. And at times that feels overwhelming and is truly the sad reality of homelessness in our community. And at other times it's really motivating that we in 1 year were able to grow as rapidly as we did, and we're able to serve as many young people as we did, and to do so really well in a way that feels supportive and loving and honoring of our youth's resilience. I think as Tim alluded to earlier, with that growth and as we serve more and more youth, we're looking a lot at infrastructure. We do a disservice to our youth if we grow too quickly and we're not prepared to do so, and we don't have the resources enough to go around to support everybody. We also risk burning out a really talented staff if we grow too quickly and put too much on people's plates at a time where we don't have a lot of extra energy to give. For me and for other leaders on this team, continuing to really look at development and how to do so in a way that feels supportive to our staff and to our youth, that takes into consideration the current challenges that our community is experiencing. So building infrastructure from a position standpoint and from a staff standpoint. I will also say that one of the other things we are doing, and this is really a team decision, it's been very hard for us not to recognize the increase in violence and the lack of safety that many of our young people are feeling right now. And so we're hoping to make a pretty big shift when it comes to our case management approach, really stressing value of our young people and reminding them and coaching them every time we see them to look at, what in your life is meaningful to you. What do you value? What about you is valuable? So they see the, really the importance of seeing themselves as valuable parts of the community, which we think will extend to neighbors and to friends and to family members. So that's a really exciting change for us. That's been a team decision. Every other week we come together as a team to talk about challenges, and this, idea of a lack of safety has come up a number of times. And so together we're gonna talk about what this looks like and how we both work with our young people on those more tangible pieces of finding employment and saving and budgeting and accessing education at the right time for them. But in addition, adding these other pieces of how do you feel safe in your home, and what makes you feel really special and really important.
You know, I think in addition to everything that I think Becky just so eloquently said is organizationally, I mean, Becky has reflected on so much of the individual change that our young people experience by being part of this organization. But I would be remiss if I didn't also note that organizationally, we are very deeply invested in systemic change. And so part of my job on behalf of the organization that I represent is to be active in the community, whether it's through our collective continuum of care and serving on its board of directors, or being appointed to the Community Collaborative Commission, which is looking at changes in community-oriented policing and law enforcement and public safety being reimagined in our community. We are always having to attend to both change on the individual and on the systems level. Because individuals exist within the systems that exist. And we know the systemic inequalities that have been part of the fabric of this community for so much of its history. And we know that that has to change as well. I mean, we understand that COVID is going to be here much longer than any of us would have dared to, fear early on. We know there are ongoing challenges relative to the lack of housing that is affordable, the lack of living, jobs that pay a living wage, all of those issues that disproportionately impact our young people. Those are things we are also trying to affect meaningful change. But we also know systems change. That's the long game, and that takes time, and that takes an ongoing commitment and investment, and that frankly organizationally is a heavy lift, but that's what we do really well. The other thing I would just add before I think we try to maybe open it up to some of the questions that have come in is, for all of the values that we as an organization place in how we work with our young people, organizationally, I also believe we have to walk the walk. And so if we attend to the trauma that our young people are experiencing, we have to attend to the trauma that our staff experience in doing this difficult work and this heavy lift. And so in the year ahead, I think organizationally, we will be doubling down on the investments we are making relative to our work environment. How nimble and flexible can we continue to be to meet the needs of our staff, as stressed and challenged as they find themselves experiencing right now? Are we competitive in our what we offer our staff? Because without them, we are not able to do this life-changing work on behalf of our young people. So there's a lot of challenges that remain, but there is also organizationally so much opportunity for continued growth that is sustainable and that is intentional, to Becky's earlier point.
I'm so excited by the support, the level of support we're seeing from the donor community in our work. You can really see the marriage between all the different facets of the business that is running Pathfinders and how that affects the day-to-day lives of our young people. So grateful for the donors that really understand that there are gaps in funding from a government standpoint, and where you can really make an impact as a person with your philanthropy. But it's also those folks in our community who are still dropping off meals, who are putting together and donating starter home kits. We're coming upon the year end, and holiday gifts is one of those things. And we're so delighted to see our faith-based partners back navigating COVID in a way that feels safe for them and also supports our young people. So we're incredibly grateful for all the different ways the community is supporting this work and supporting these young people, and helping our team walk alongside those young people to see success, to see that they really feel empowered, they really feel like they have agency, and they can resolve some of those unresolved trauma that they've experienced and find safe and stable housing, and hopefully end homelessness for themselves through their lifetime. So this was an amazing talk. You know, I love hearing both of you speak to our work, and we've answered the questions that people have had as we've gone along here today, but I would just welcome either of you if you have any final thoughts you'd like to share before we wrap up. Now is the time.
Becky, go ahead.
Well, I mean, all of us know, I'll speak for myself, but I don't think I'm alone in this, that nobody really has a lot of extra energy right now for things that feel taxing or feel heavy or feel emotional. And all of you have chosen to be here. Please know how much that means to me, and I will share that with my team, that we have a group of individuals that supports us, that really cares about our youth and cares about the work that we do. So thank you for choosing to be with us today, for all of your continued support.
Mm-hmm. And I would echo that and simply add that, because we say this so often because we really mean it, we would not be the organization that we are today were it not for your commitment and your support. The fact that you took an hour of your time today to join us and hear about what we're doing, how we're affecting meaningful change in the lives of our community's most vulnerable young people, and the fact that you support that work in all the many ways that Renee just noted, that means so much to us. And we could not do this work were it not for your support. So thank you for that. And thank you for that partnership and that commitment.
Thank you, and thank you for the lovely comments. And that's what we have for today. So thank you again for joining us. If you have any questions, you can always email. We're always available at development@pathfindersmke.org. We'll get you to the right person to answer any questions you may have. But again, we thank you for your time today.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Stay safe.
Thank you.